I think that what we could learn from our colleagues and our fellow hotel operators and employees around the world, in particular stations, is really being nice. I mean, that sounds so simple, but just, if you're miserable in your job, or if you're not the right fit, or if somebody walks through your door and you're desperate to hire somebody, don't hire them just because you need to fill that role.
This is Hospitality 1-to-1, conversations on the industry. Here's your host, Chris Bennis.
Welcome to the Hospitality 1-to-1 podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also check us out on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Hospitality 1-to-1. We're on Twitter at Hospitality 1-to-1. We also post video versions of our podcast on YouTube. Just search for Hospitality 1-to-1. And of course, you can find us on our website, which is www.hospitality1to1.com. We also want to hear from you. Is there someone who you think we should be talking to? Let us know. You could email me at chris@hospitality1to1.com. Joining us today is Juan Bueno. Juan got his start in the hospitality industry as the Assistant Housekeeping Manager at the Stouffer Hotel in Washington, D.C. During a vacation to San Francisco, Juan fell in love with the city and relocated out west, where he has worked in a variety of roles. Most recently, he was the general manager of 2 boutique independent hotels in downtown San Francisco. He had 6 very successful years there, and now he is consulting for several projects in the United States, Israel, and Asia. And now, Juan Bueno. Juan, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, it's my pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's just get right at it if we can, because you've got quite an impressive background, if you will. It's very diverse, and it includes both branded and independent hotels.
Correct.
So you've had that unique both sides of the aisle, if you will. Do you feel hiring is the same for both?
I do, Chris. I think that whether it's an independent hotel, whether it's a boutique hotel, irregardless of what size of property you are, you're looking for good people that have good work ethic, are dedicated, and will make great colleagues. So I think that the philosophy is the same no matter what.
Now, in your experience, do you feel that a branded person can work in a boutique hotel or vice versa?
Absolutely. I think that it's probably easier to be an employee or a manager or whatever you want to, whatever position at a branded hotel and go to a boutique hotel than vice versa, at least in what I've seen. And the reason for that is that I think that the brands give you your structure. They give you your foundations, whether it's through training or standard operating procedures that are in place, tried and true. Whereas the boutique hotels a lot of times don't have that foundation. They're more, I don't want to say shoot from the hip, but, they have a lot more flexibility and not as rigid, which is good in a lot of ways. But I found that as far as development of talent, there was a lack of cohesion there. So I always felt that it was easier to transition from a brand to a boutique than the other way around. Not that it's impossible if you have the right person, but just from my observations, it was easier for branded to boutique.
That's a fair point. That's actually a very good point. Now, your role, of course, as a general manager, you've actually had the unique privilege of working in not 1, not 2, but 3 of the largest markets in the U.S. This is, of course, New York City, Los Angeles, and San Francisco.
Correct.
So, in your experience, have you noticed any labor differences between the cities?
I did. The thing that stuck out the most for me was San Francisco. It's a very expensive city, and probably in the last 5 to 6 years, it's gotten even more expensive. We've been in a good economy overall in the U.S., but just getting line-level employees has been such a problem. And not only for our hotels, but for the entire hotel community here in San Francisco. You have to go out further and further and further. You have to get creative with your recruiting, whether it's offering signing bonus or providing free transportation, and not that you're going to pick people up, but maybe compensating for their transportation, paying for it in essence, to attract them if that's an issue, because you're going further and further outside of the city. So it's been a real challenge here in San Francisco, whereas in Los Angeles, in New York City, I didn't encounter those problems. Of course, it was a different economy back then, but still, it was almost night and day, the difference in attracting good quality colleagues.
What do you feel is the toughest city to find good talent in?
I would say San Francisco is, due to the cost of living. I mean, it's very expensive, so it really prices a lot of people out. I mean, I've been fortunate that I've had an apartment here for 24 years, even though I've moved around and worked in other cities, just because I knew if I left, the landlord would put it at a market appropriate rate, and I'd never be able to get it back. And so I think that because of the cost of living, San Francisco really is problematic. And as an industry, not only in hotels, but as restaurants, it's really affecting a lot of the operators here in the city. There's big concerns about it and what to do. And there's a lot of meetings and discussions, whether it's the Hotel Association or different restaurant associations, or the basically our Convention and Visitors Bureau, to address that problem, because we all see it as being probably the number one problem in our industry.
That's a great point, because obviously you have a number of high-end hotels in the San Francisco market. The
Yes.
cost of living is one thing. Of course, what your budget can afford is another. What things are hotels in San Francisco doing to try to combat the fact that they now have hotels that with the employees requiring a higher cost of living, but necessarily not being able to afford the Uber salaries, if you will? How are they combating that?
Exactly. That's a great point. We noticed that probably over the last 2 to 3 years, we lost a lot of great associates to the Ubers, to the Lyfts, because they can work whenever they want, so they can make their own schedule. There wouldn't be any conflicts with school if they were younger and still going to school and completing university. So it was tough. The city of San Francisco basically has increased their minimum wage, and it is going to $15 an hour next July. So we've been gradually building up to that, but next July it'll be $15 per hour for all positions. Now that'll help us, but what also hurts us here in the city, when I was working in the boutique hotels as an independent general manager, was that we have union versus non-union hotels, and the union hotels pay so much more that it's really, really, really challenging to retain good employees. So you have to be creative, and you have to really bond with your employees and hear what their concerns are, to try to retain a lot of that talent, because it is difficult. We're competing against the St. Regis, the Ritz-Carltons, the Grand Hyatts, the branded hotels, who our employees say, wow, I'm doing the same job here that I would be doing there, but over there I get $8, $9, $10 more an hour. Why do I stay here? And our job as operators of independent non-union hotels is to say, well, we can offer you A, B, C, D, E, and try to work out, try to retain those employees, because it is difficult.
Now, you were talking before, you had that, again, unique experience of working on both coasts.
Yes.
So aside from, we've broken down San Francisco, but let's put San Francisco and L.A. together. Let's call that, of course, West Coast. And, of course, you've worked the East Coast. What has been the biggest difference from an employer standpoint finding good talent when it comes to the East Coast versus West Coast?
That's a good question. I don't think that there's anything that sticks out in my mind as being a big difference between both. I think that in both markets, people want to have security. People want to have, benefits, good benefits that you're offering. The schedules are important. So I found that what the employees, the associates, were looking for in both markets were comparable. Maybe I would say the biggest difference, and this could be attributed to New York City and how vibrant and diverse that city is we had people from all over the world, and so we had a very unique and very cross-cultural employee population that was great. I think we had something like 18 languages, and we were a tiny hotel. We were, 137 rooms, but we had a lot of people from everywhere, and it was just nice to have that feeling. Where here in San Francisco and Los Angeles, you have more of your larger populations. San Francisco is very, a lot of the labor market is either Chinese or Filipino, so you have in most hotels big populations of those employees that dominate that. In Southern California, you have more Latino and that kind of population. But in New York, it was more diverse. That would be probably the biggest difference.
That's actually a very astute observation when it comes to the differences in the areas, if you will. Very, very, very wise, if you will, statement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, let's, if we can, go even further out. So we, instead of looking at East Coast and West Coast, let's look globally. Because recently you've traveled quite a bit.
I have. I've been. Yes.
Did some international travel. And so when it comes to that, do international hotels have the same labor issues in your eyes, or have any labor issues?
No, they do. I spent some time consulting in the Middle East. I was in Israel, and then I went to Greece, which is Europe, and then I was in Southeast Asia working on a couple of projects with some folks that I'd worked with before, and so I was able to chat with my colleagues in other parts of the world, and it's the same headaches and same challenges throughout. In Southeast Asia, because the labor the cost of labor is quite low for operators, but they're still looking for talent. So even though they may offer competitive salaries or even above market salaries, it's getting that right individual to come in through the doors, which are the same problems and challenges that we have here. It's always about scheduling. It's and what that seems to be very important to people, no matter where you are. I think that being short-staffed, people are there's a lot of movement in the world where people aren't happy, and it's not like in the past when people stayed at companies for 30 years, 40 years, and made it a career, really. Now I think different generations have different aspirations and are quicker to leave an opportunity if it's not a right fit for them at that time. And I found that throughout the parts of the world that I was visiting and consulting with. And so I think that there's a lot of similarities, but at the same time, you have differences just as far as cultural differences and how you go about hiring people. Sometimes there's some things in other countries that you can't do here in the States. For example, over there they would put an ad for when I mean over there, I'm sorry. In Thailand, they would put an ad for, front desk agents, and they said it has to be, between 21 and 28 years old and fit this, demographic, and that's very frowned upon over here in the States. So it's definitely different, but there's a lot of overlap as to what we're looking for in individuals, and a lot of the same challenges.
Now, in the areas you've been at across the world, is there any particular area that you feel has, on a growth spurt, you really see them on an increase when it comes to either hotel growth, employee growth, general hospitality improvement, if you will?
Asia has always been known as places where you have top-notch service, whether it's Singapore, whether it's Hong Kong, different parts of China and Japan. They've always set the bar quite high, in my opinion, with the quality and performance that you quality and service that you come across. Now, I was in Laos and I was in Vietnam, and I was very surprised with the steps and I'll say leaps and bounds that they are achieving by bringing in a lot of expats, gentlemen and ladies from, whether it's the UK or Australia or the US, to come in and be the general managers or front office managers or whatever department head role and really try to work with those individuals and give them the training. You have a plethora of employees. You have a lot more employees there than you would have here. So I was really impressed and hopeful that in, maybe over the next 4, 5, 10 years, the tourism in those two countries per se is really going to take off. I think that they have a lot of great things going on, very exciting things. And so I wish them, a lot of luck in succeeding in that manner.
Now, this question may require a little bit of thought, so I'll give you a moment as I ask it. But everyone always talks about how the United States offers great service, and then we tend to export our ideas, service, standards out to other hotels across other countries. Let's flip that, if you will. Is there anything that you've seen from the hotels from an international perspective that is lacking here stateside that we can bring to hotels in the U.S. to help improve service, standards, experience, that type of thing?
Absolutely. And, I think that, from what I've seen when I travel, I think it's, in particular with Asia, maybe not so much as Europe or South America, but I feel that in the U.S. our service levels have decreased. I don't think that we're as good as we were once. I think that what we could learn from our colleagues and our fellow hotel operators and employees around the world, in particular Asia, is really being nice. I mean, that sounds so simple, but just, if you're miserable in your job, or if you're not the right fit, or if somebody walks through your door and you're desperate to hire somebody, don't hire them just because you need to fill that role. Make sure you take the time to find somebody who's genuinely hospitable, who will greet people warmly, who will make them feel that they're a guest and they're valued, because I think that that's lacking a lot of times when I travel here in the States. And it's not everywhere, but there's times where you walk into a hotel or a restaurant or wherever it may be, and you don't get a nice greeting, or you don't get a nice goodbye, or you're kind of take it for granted and you don't feel valued. And I think that in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, I feel that there is a lot more warmth. It's professional, but there's a lot more friendliness, and people want to make sure that you're okay, that you're happy, and it really resonates a little bit further, I think. So I think those are the things that we can learn from them.
Great points to keep in mind as we begin to look at improving service and helping to provide that best experience for our guests.
Yes.
Now, a little more about you. You've actually come up and worked a lot with operation roles throughout the hotel industry. So from a personal standpoint, do you feel that you lacked anything in your career? In other words, as you look at each step along the way, is there anything you feel that you wish you would have known as you began to take the next step in your career?
It's like the question, if I would have known everything I knew when I was 18, I'd be, very, very rich and famous, I guess. Throughout my career, as I went through it, you try to do your best. But one of the things that I really learned at an early point in my career was that there's always something else to learn. I guess that what I would wish I would have had a better handle or been exposed to earlier in my career would have been things that deal with NOP, which is, you have GOP, which is what you as an operator are responsible, everything above the GOP line. Mm-hmm. But then you have an NOP line. And between your GOP and your NOP are things like taxes, depreciation, things that are important to the ownership, but you as an operator can't control. And so I think that I would have liked to have been exposed to that earlier in my career, so that when I met with owners, when I worked with owners and, saw the day-to-day interactions, I could maybe foresee and help them to achieve the goals that they wanted in those areas that I didn't have control over, but maybe through some interaction with my day-to-day colleagues or other things, I might be able to help them. So I think that was one of the areas that I felt, and I feel that in general managers don't have exposure to that or don't have a lot of good knowledge about that. There are some that are great at it, but I think that in general, I'd say very few are well versed in those things. Nowadays, there's great, with the online presence of OTAs, etc. I think that the intricacies of revenue management are very important, and I don't think that I was exposed to that as much as I probably should have been. I've kind of had to learn it on my own, and I've had some great directors of revenue who've, kind of showed me and explained to me, and we talk about it and talk about philosophies and how we can improve margins. But I think that that's something that I think I would have liked to have more exposure to. I think those are probably the two biggest things. Everything else I felt was appropriate, and I could always rely on colleagues or mentors, et cetera, to help me out. But those two things I think would be areas that I felt I could have used more assistance on.
Now, let's put a step forward, if we will. So now the next generation. We're talking about the future leaders, those who are either still in school or perhaps fresh out, and they're just getting their start in their career. And of course, they're now on that similar path to becoming a GM.
Sure.
What can you tell them? What advice do you have for them? What tips or tricks do you recommend that they do in their career to help move forward?
Yeah, I would say don't think that your questions are not valid. Ask as many questions as you want. Be vocal. Don't be shy. I think that the more you ask, the faster you'll learn. I would say definitely identify a mentor, and there's many of them out there. There's people who want to help the future and want to assist you and are good mentors. So I would say try to find a mentor who cares about you and cares about your career path, because they will be very valuable to you throughout your career and afterwards. I would say don't lose track of having a good work-life balance. You want to do that. I've seen, I went to school at Michigan State University, and I graduated with probably, maybe 30 people that I still keep close contact with. And a lot of them got burnt out the first 5, 6, 7 years and are out of the industry. I think there's only 3 or 4 of us that are still in the industry. And I attribute that to having a better work-life balance and having people that respected that along my career, instead of, just working these ungodly hours. And there's better ways. You can work smarter, not harder, and still achieve great things.
Now, one of the things we like to do is also pick the brain of a GM, because it's a chance for those in any level of a hotel who are looking, perhaps not in the hotels yet, perhaps in a hotel, and they could use that extra bit of advice. So aside from the tangibles of a certain role requiring a certain skill set, let's look at interviewing.
Okay.
When it comes to a candidate, what do you look for in a candidate? Never mind the position, just in the person. What are the intangibles you tend to look for that people can work on as part of their interview skills?
Absolutely. And again, for any and all positions, be on time. Be early if possible, but definitely be on time. Don't be late. Bring your resume. You'd be amazed how many people don't bring their resume to an interview. They assume that we have one. I mean, sometimes we're interviewing 20, 30 people during a day, and it might be getting pulled from your day doing things. So come prepared. Research the company and ask questions about it that you really are interested in. There's a lot of times where I'll always end the interview with, what questions do you have for me? And half the people don't have any, and half the people do. And some of those questions are very good. And so that always those candidates stick out more in my mind than the candidates that did not. Look professional. It's always better to be overdressed than underdressed. So those are some of the basic things. Take your time and explain yourself. You don't have to answer questions in a rush. Take your time, be mindful, but be thorough. And practice makes perfect. I mean, the more you interview, the more comfortable you'll be. And so it's really, like you said at the beginning of this session, it's more of think of it more as a conversation. And, also think that you're interviewing them, that as an employee, as a candidate, you are seeing whether they are a good fit for you. So don't just think of it as one-sided. Always think of it as being two-sided.
Very valuable advice. Now, if we can, let's look at one of the, I guess, signature issues that the hotel industry is facing, and that's turnover. By all accounts, turnover is pretty high. In fact, according to some reports, it's as high as 70%. What do you feel is important to keep employees engaged and on point?
I think you can boil it down to some key things. A, you want to make the right hires. B, you want to set expectations early about what you expect from them, and what should they expect from you. And then training. Training. It's a basic thing, but sometimes it's overlooked. Sometimes it's the sink or swim theory, which is just will never work. You really have to invest in your training and be thorough about it and make sure it happens. Communication. As a general manager, I would have daily departmental meetings in the morning. The quick 9 a.m. briefings, and later on throughout the day, I chat with employees and say, "Oh, did you hear about this or did you hear about that?" And they had no clue what I was talking about. And so that's very frustrating where the message isn't being delivered. And so communication is very important. And I think we need to be, as leaders, be consistent with our employees, whether it's with discipline or recognition or whatever the case may be. You need to be consistent. If you're up and down, and you'll lose your employees, and you'll lose respect, and you'll create unnecessary stress and tension in the workplace, and you'll constantly be losing people.
Now, let's look at this from a hotelier or from a hotel itself, if you will. It could be a new, old, doesn't matter, that may be experiencing issues with turnover or, if you will, a negative employer brand.
Okay.
What is the first step? You've given a number of great tips, but what's the first step they should take to right the ship, if you will?
I would say, get in there and get your hands dirty and talk to people, talk to employees, one-on-ones, and say, hey, listen, how satisfied are you? I mean, I don't know if this hotel would have employees climate surveys or not, but let's say they didn't. You would want to speak to your employees on a one-on-one basis and find out, what's important to you, what do you like about your job, and what don't you like about your job, and try to see if there's any common patterns, any common things that you can work on and solve. A lot of times it's simple things. My manager doesn't hear me, or my manager never has time for me, and it's just all you need is take an extra 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day with an individual, and they'll feel appreciated, and they may put more of an effort. Sometimes there's more pressing problems, like we don't feel we're being paid properly, et cetera, and then, then you have to do a market survey and a wage survey and see if there are any deficiencies. But you need to find out what the problems are with your employees, and you do that by speaking with them and making them feel at ease. It's not a witch hunt. It's we're trying to find a solution here. So let's be honest. Tell us what's going on.
And along those lines, because that's fantastic advice, of course, let's forecast, if you will.
Okay.
In your experience, you've seen hotels and the industry in general go through a transformation. Look ahead. What does the future of hotels look like? What does the industry look like moving forward?
It's. I feel that hotels will do well in the future. I don't see any major shift saying that, they're going to have a huge downturn, or there's going to be something on the horizon that's going to affect them like taxis were affected by Uber. Now, that being said, I do feel that things like VRBO, Airbnb are definitely having an impact on our industry. And this may sound bad, but I think that I'll give you an example. Here in San Francisco, twice a year we have 2 major conventions. And during those conventions, our rates are too high. I mean, they're high because that's what the market demands, but they're just, outrageous. I know that the owners love them, and investors love them, but it's not fair. It's not fair for what is being offered. We're just taking advantage of a hot market. Now, that could be a great thing, but I think that at some point you as an industry could be perceived as being greedy, and that wouldn't fare well for us. So I think we need to be cognizant of, okay, what's fair and what should we be charging, and not just push rate and not really change anything. I mean, if we had a Rolls Royce driving you all over town, that would be one thing, but offering one room one day at $199 and the next day at $899 for the same exact room is not fair, in my opinion. And I think that the greed may hurt us as an industry more than anything else.
That's a good cautionary tale to what to look for as we move ahead to 2018 and frankly beyond.
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking this time to talk to us, Juan. If anyone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, the best way to reach me, I'm very open book, and so they can just give me a call or shoot me an email. I'm available and love to speak with people that are interested about the industry and the challenges we have and the opportunities and the great things that happen in our industry. So they can give me a call or send me an email. I'm open to that.
That's terrific. And we're going to link Juan's phone number, email address, all that good stuff we'll put up on our website, which is hospitality1to1.com. Juan, thank you so much for your time today. Great conversation.
Thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Thanks for listening to the Hospitality 1-to-1 podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also check us out on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/hospitality1to1. We're on Twitter @hospitality1to1. We also post video versions of our podcast on YouTube. Just search for Hospitality 1-to-1. And of course, you can find us on our website, which is www.hospitality1to1.com.